Welcome to Innovate presents Entrepreneurs in Tech. Today we're delighted to have our guest Amrit Chandan, who is the CEO of Gauge19 and an entrepreneur, mentor, and sustainability advocate. I don't know what else to say, but that's a lot. Amazing. Thank you for joining us today. And for our listeners who might not be familiar with you, could you please introduce yourself and give us a bit of insights on your background and expertise before we dive into this amazing, insightful interview?
Thank you so much for having me on, Bob. I'm thrilled to be here and to contribute to your amazing podcast. Okay, so just to introduce myself briefly. So I started my career with a PhD in hydrogen fuel cell technology. Quickly caught the bug for sustainability when a UN scientist came to our research group and told us that the world was beyond saving. He said, don't even try, just give up, live your best life. And that was super depressing to hear. So after sort of internalizing that message for a little while, I decided I wanted to step into the so-called tragic gap to try and change the world from where it is to what it could be. And so then finished my PhD study, started working in the low carbon vehicle space. And that's where sort of we were looking at the market deployment, seeing how many electric vehicles were coming to market, how much renewables were coming online, and figured there was a big problem in the battery space where we needed so many batteries, so many that by 2040 there'll be 23 times Wembley Stadium in the UK coming offline every single year based on the amount of batteries we need to achieve net zero. But they're not designed for the circular economy, so there's a big struggle there because we produce, we use, and then we throw away these devices. And that's incredibly wasteful and could just lead us back into the same problem we're at now with fossil fuel based power. So figured there was a big enough problem here to solve that, and it's where I met my co-founder of that business, Carlton, and we sort of left two young naive men looking to make a difference in the world, and spent 7 years in that business. So raised capital, grew the team, built the corporate partnerships, won the T-shirt, got the scars. And then middle of last year, we had the opportunity to sell the technology we'd been developing to one of our licensing partners in India, and made sense for us to go through that process. So went through that, and sort of.
So you sold it. You sold the technology.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so we went through an exit process, and
amazing.
Yeah, it took a few months.
Congratulations. Amazing. So is it something you would share with us or private, which we respect that? Absolutely. What was the dollar sign?
Yeah, I wish I could share it, Bob. It was one of
those. It's okay. But listen, I see you smiling. So obviously enough to make you happy.
Enough to make me happy, indeed.
Yeah. Yes.
So we ended up, so I took a few months off at that point to get over the trauma of the whole event.
Yes.
And started figuring out what I wanted to do next. So started having lots of conversations with folks, and then landed on Gauge19, which I'm really thrilled to tell you more about.
Wow, I'm excited. Before we dive into anything, let's say you're high school graduates. What do I want to study? Mom, Dad, I want to study fuel cell technology. Does that title even exist in the book? What is this? To me, when I read it, PhD in fuel cell technology. Please, if I do sound ignorant, I do apologize for all the PhD holders in the fuel cell technology. Forgive me. I want to learn. So please.
Yeah. No, absolutely, Bob. So I when I was doing my undergraduate degree, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do in my career and hadn't yet sort of understood that. So going back, I guess, my family is a family of entrepreneurs. So my grandfather came over to the UK, actually on both sides, they came over to the UK, my maternal and paternal grandfather, during the call for worker migration in the sort of 50s, 60s. So the British Empire needed to rebuild the UK, and so called for labour from across the empire to come and support that. So they came across, and we have had a family of entrepreneurs where sort of pretty much everyone in the family have owned businesses and sort of done that. But I wasn't sure if that was the path I wanted to go on. So I did my study and then thought, go into a graduate scheme, join one of the big corporates and sort of live life on the greasy pole, as it were, always sort of struggling to move up. And I did one or two applications, and just to put this in context, Bob, you have to fill out all your information on these forms. You go through that process, and there are so many sort of graduates graduating every year in the UK. There's a limited number of posts. They don't even do you the courtesy of a response. So you fill out the application, you spend ages on it, and then you get sort of an automated form that says if you don't hear from us in a couple of weeks, then just assume you haven't got the role. And so I did one or two of those applications and decided that's not for me. I don't want to jump through anyone else's hoops. They can jump through mine if they want to work with me. And so and just at that time as well, the financial crash, the global financial crash happened. So there was naturally a shortage. So I was looking around at sort of what I could do next, and enjoyed the technical side of things. And within sort of chemical engineering, there was a professor who had a research group in hydrogen fuel cell technology, and I thought this sounds really interesting. Hydrogen could be the future, and sort of went into it, but not really knowing too much other than it was an interesting topic that had potential to power the cars and the buildings that we use every day. And so the rest, as they say, is history. So I spent 4 years working on that, and then realized I wanted to be much more practical in what I do, and sort of much more sort of hands-on. And do you know, Bob, how long fuel cells? Do you know when the fuel cell was invented?
You know what? No, no. I would like you to tell me and tell our viewers and listeners on entrepreneurs in tech. This is extremely educational, not just inspiring interview, educational. I'm going to sell this probably. Sell
So
courses on it.
they were invented in 1839.
No way.
So
1839.
they've been around for a
Wow.
while. Yeah,
200 years ago.
yeah, a long time
Wow.
ago. They're only slightly younger than
Whoa,
sort
what
of
am I
battery
saying?
technology as we
300
as we
years.
use it.
Wow. Amazing.
So
Amazing.
yeah, and yeah, they're sort of close to commercialization now, but still need some more work done to reach that place.
Do you feel there's a pushback? Because a lot of nobody wants to interrupt their, how should I say, their stream flow of revenues. And, big corporations. We're not against capitalism and making money and all of that, but do you feel there's a big pushback still? They want to leave things the way it is just because of the bottom line?
I think maybe 30 years ago that was the case. Not so much,
No.
against hydrogen, but certainly against sort of electric vehicles. It's really fascinating actually to see, and it was only because of the work of pioneers in the space that were showing that electric vehicles do have the capability of competing with conventional fuel-based vehicles in terms of range, which is one of the big sort of anxiety-inducing factors for drivers. That they've really taken off. So disruptors like Elon Musk, for example, who brought Tesla vehicles to the market and really put a lot of pressure on the standard automakers to up their game in terms of the electric vehicle offering they had, but also the role of policy and regulation as well. So California in particular have been really big in this space,
Yes.
pushing for lower
Yeah,
emissions,
correct.
as has the European governments as well.
Let's talk about Cenex and, about low carbon vehicle technologies. I know you worked at Cenex, and how did that experience, made you shape your understanding of low carbon vehicle technologies?
Yeah, so just before I went to Cenex, I had quite a keen interest in it. So a good friend of mine, Scott Hardman, who's at UC Davis Institute of Transportation Studies, he and I were sort of looking at the way innovations get into the market, and that was something he was sort of a scholar in. And it was something I always found really fascinating, sort of why electric vehicles, why not fuel cell vehicles, as an example. And it was sort of on the back of that interest that I saw the opening at Cenex, and went there to do some work. So I became, for a short while, I was their hydrogen expert, involved in all of the hydrogen projects they were involved in. So these were looking at the refueling stations, looking at the application of hydrogen within fleets. But obviously for low carbon vehicles, that includes things like biogas powered vehicles, electric vehicles, fuel cell vehicles, and sometimes other technologies as well.
So while you're working at Cenex, you co-founded, you and your partner, Acceleron. So, what really inspired you to co-found Acceleron in 2016, and what impact did you hope to make?
We saw there was enough of an opportunity. I started really sort of brainstorming, having ideas. Carlton is the real techie in our partnership, so he was sort of there tinkering away with batteries, making them work. He designed his own electric bike, so he was using that to cycle around and having great fun. So we started out taking apart as many batteries as we could get our hands on, and really sort of figured out that there was a fundamental problem with the way they're constructed, and that is there's lots of permanent assembly techniques used. So there's spot welding, there's glues, there's sort of structural foams involved, which make the battery sort of compact, but make it impossible to service it. So if you try and repair a battery that's no longer working, and these are all lithium-ion batteries, if you try and repair a lithium battery that's not working, you destroy it, because you by sort of getting into the internal structure, you're destroying these mechanical constructs, and that's a problem because you can't then reassemble that very easily and repair it. And so what ends up happening is a battery stops working. It could be a particular cell, it could be a group, it could be the battery management system, it could be a faulty wire connection, but the whole thing is considered scrap. It's so crazy. It's like if you imagine you're driving down the road in your car, and something goes wrong with the car, and you have to pull over by the side of the road, and the repair people come along and they say, we can't repair this. Your only option is to scrap the whole vehicle. If you've got a punctured tire and they say, we can't change the tire because the tire's welded onto the vehicle, your only option is to scrap the whole vehicle. It just doesn't make any sense to do that. But this is what we do with lithium-ion batteries. We throw away so many of them, which have got so much life left in them. And so, using his ingenuity, Carlton came up with a better way to make these devices, which meant that we would be able to recover 10 times more value from a lithium-ion battery than using conventional assembly methods. And so that was a big boost for sustainability, because then we're sort of able to reuse all the components as many times as possible, reduce the amount of waste that's generated.
Yes.
So one of the projects I was most proud of, we worked in collaboration with the UN IOM. So that's the Institution for Migration.
Mm-hmm.
And we put a battery recovery system into one of the migration camps, so the Bidi Bidi camp in northern Uganda. So we shipped all the equipment, parts, pieces needed, and we were able to take solar products, of which there are many in these camps, and we were able to sort of train local people to turn these into useful products, which they could then use in the camp or sell into the local market. And that was great because these camps, by their nature, these are sort of in remote locations. They're far away from cities. Like it was a 10-hour road journey to get to the camp from the capital city, and that's a big problem. So like you've got these humanitarian organizations that are putting loads of money and sort of loads of products into the camp to make life bearable there, and which is great. But if they're not repairable and there's no way to sort of deal with the waste, what ends up happening is people end up burning that waste because they have no other solution. And so or they try and recover the materials themselves in sort of low tech, dangerous ways. So literally, putting a battery, for example, on a open fire in order to try and recover whatever metals they can from it to sell on the market. So much more informal, and that presents a huge challenge to their health and to the local environment as well. So it can be quite a destructive way of doing things. But we were really pleased to sort of do that project with the IOM. It was in collaboration with Total and with Shell, with support from the UK government as well through the Department the FCDO, that's the Foreign Commonwealth Development Office.
Interesting, very interesting. And what was your biggest challenges when you co-founded Acceleron with your partner, and how did you overcome some of these challenges?
Where to begin, Bob? I think there's there's so many. I think reflecting on the journey, and I don't say this sort of to be self-flagellating, but rather as a perhaps a sign of growth. 90% of the decisions I made during my journey, if I had the chance to do them again, I would do differently.
Oh, you would. Amazing.
Yes, yeah, because there were just so many things. As an example, as a first-time founder, I did not appreciate just how important working capital was, how big of a challenge that can be. So, for those who don't know, working capital is the amount of money that's tied up in just running the business, and in particular, if you're doing things with supply chains that are long, if you're buying products, for example, from China or from the Far East, and you're moving them to other parts of the world, you're potentially looking at a sort of 5 to 8 month working capital cycle. So you might have a lot of money tied up in stock that's on the water, and until you can sell that stock, you don't see that money back. And so that sort of cash flow piece was quite eye opening to learn about as an example. And other things like when you're raising capital and you've not done it before, sometimes you just don't know the sort of the pitfalls to watch out for. So almost just by going through that process, you end up sort of laying landmines for yourself, which future you has to try and diffuse carefully. But at the time, you don't realize that that's what's going on, because you sign up to terms and you agree to things that you don't understand the consequence of.
Yes, correct. I'm right. Do you think that we ever come to a point where we would say, fuel, gasoline is obsolete? Are we still so heavily dependent on it, because of the amount of energy that it produces?
I think this is a big problem, Bob. So it's not necessarily the most energy dense in terms of its weight, but certainly by volume, your fossil fuel based energy sources are. And that is the challenge. So if you look at hydrogen, for example, hydrogen is the most energy dense fuel by mass.
Yeah.
But volumetrically, it's a big challenge to contain that hydrogen. It wants to escape. It wants to be in the atmosphere. So finding alternatives is a challenge. It's so easy to transport. We know how to use it. We've been using it for a long time. And the other problem is it's not just the fuel use as a fuel, but we use the products of oil
Correct.
pretty much all the time, everywhere, and sometimes in ways that are non-obvious that we don't even realize. So, for example, chances are the medicines that we take to live will have been derived from, or will have come into contact with, components of crude oil, because oil is, by its nature, hydrogen and carbon, the fundamental building block of pretty much everything we have, and it's a great source of it. So it's much easier to take hydrocarbons from the ground and convert those into the chemicals that we need, to numb our pain or to sort of help us in our daily lives, than it is to build those from scratch. So we it's not just medicines; it's plastics. It's used all over the place.
So you've been through and you lived through the entrepreneurial kind of path of a startup when you started Acceleron with your partner. How was it like to raise 15 million pounds, which is probably, I don't know, $20 million or $18 million? Yes.
Roughly about that. Yeah.
That's a large amount to raise for a startup. How do you become successful at raising that money? And obviously the company itself became successful because of the partnerships that you able to create.
Yeah, it's a good question, Bob. I think the first thing I'd say and this is true for any founder, hopefully, is that it's never about the sort of amount of money that's raised. At the end of the day, if you're going on a road trip, the purpose of the road trip is to see the landscape and see whatever sort of is at the destination. It's not necessarily to enjoy the gas stations along the way. And sort of raising capital is very much sort of the gas station in that analogy. So, and what I find really fascinating is that having sort of been through that journey and talking to other founders, the number of founders that say to me, if I could do it again, I would raise the absolute least amount possible, rather than sort of raising more. And that's something that resonates with me as well. There's of course there's advantages to raising capital, but there's also a lot of disadvantages to doing so as well. You give up a lot of control, you dilute a lot, you have
how much you own of it towards the end. Yeah, you end up owning 10-15% if you're lucky sometime.
Yeah, exactly. It goes down a lot, and of course, the adage that a seasoned venture capitalist will tell you is, well, it's better to own a small percentage of something than 100% of nothing. And yes, that's true. But when you then start adding in other terms like liquidation preferences and rights and all of that, then very quickly these it almost becomes like a prison that you're in, as opposed to a pathway to a better future. Or it can feel like that. So again, it's something which resonates a lot is the number of founders I've
Yes.
spoken to who just feel like they have they feel like they're underwater. They feel like they're really struggling because of the amount of pressure and the sort of terms that they're under, and ultimately that desire. They want to make the change. They want to see the world in a better place, but they're struggling with the complexity of the situation they find themselves in.
What you done, your path, the way you carved your path from being studying, getting the proper degrees you want, then getting the proper jobs, learning, understanding the market, seeing the gaps and what's missing, and looking if there's a problem, how can I fix that problem? Understanding the market and establishing a great network, obviously, and gaining the experience. I think this is, I would say, the path that every entrepreneur I have on the show and I interview, this has been always the path that every successful entrepreneur who have a couple of great successful exits even, and it doesn't matter what type of a startup it was, whether it's in tech and sustainability and renewable energy, whatever, or healthcare, it's always the same path. And I see the struggle, but I want to get your point of view. You see a lot of, they say always, what is it, 80% to 90% fail startups, only 10% make it out there. So is it that the reason a lot of them focus on the idea and not understanding the market, not understanding the gap, not understanding the problems, why they created this? Because there's a problem and they see the problem and they have the solution for the problem. From your opinion, as a successful entrepreneur who been through it all and exit successfully, started another venture, what is your kind of opinion on that, or your take on it?
Yeah, I think there's a huge amount of this which is sometimes outside of our control. So there's a hefty component of luck, I would say, that's involved. Sometimes the market is right and there's the perfect storm that just propels things forwards. So for example, if you were at the start of the pandemic and you'd been, let's say you were in the biosciences space, you've been working on mRNA vaccines for the last 10 years and probably not seen much interest in the market because it wasn't a hot topic. And then overnight, that suddenly became the hot space because of
We
the
call that luck. Maybe it's luck.
yeah. That's exactly what I'm sort of saying. This
Yes.
is that's a massive there's a massive luck component to it. What I find also quite interesting is I find that sort of we're on a I like to think that we're sort of as entrepreneurs on an exponential curve. But where we start on that exponential curve is as a factor of our upbringing, our sort of experience, our like, have we done this before? Is this a second time or third time, or whatever? And hopefully, each time we start again, we're sort of a little bit further up that exponential curve, and it's a bit easier to get to the kind of scale that we're looking for. So, I would say like a big part of it is that, and then the other side of it, I think, is the self awareness. So the people I really admire, the entrepreneurs that I think are the ones to really emulate and be like, are the ones who actually really understand themselves, the roles they play, understand what kind of leader they are, where their strengths are, where their weaknesses are. And I think that's something really special because it means that they don't become the blocker to their own success and the success of those around them as well. So they understand exactly what they can do and how to go about doing it.
You sold your company, Acceleron. You exited out of it this year. And the typical scenario, you stay on board for a couple of years. What made you say, you know what, I just want to move on?
I think I was ready, so I thought about it quite a lot,
Yeah,
and very much sort of had the option to stay, but
yeah.
I didn't want to do that. I wanted to explore new horizons, and I felt that the impact I want to have is bigger than just the battery industry, and I felt like if I stayed, I would be a battery person, and not that there's anything wrong with that at all, but I just wanted to experience other models and other ideas. And one of the promises I made to myself, sort of having been in a hardware tech business, sort of manufacturing and selling things, was I wanted my next business to be very different. I didn't want to be sort of in that space again. So that was a sort of another motivator for it. So just wanted to get on with life and move forward, look forward. So I think that was a big part for me in making that decision, and it was fairly simple. I think what perhaps we'll touch on this later, but I decided that I wanted to the sort of over my career. There's three main things I want to achieve. I want to build something and be involved with things that are worth more than $1 billion. I want to help offset more than a gigaton of CO2 across my career, and I want to help positively impact more than 100 million people around the world. So if I can achieve that, it doesn't matter to me so much whether that's in a battery business or if that's in a fuel cell business or if that's in a software business or what that is, but that's what I want to achieve. And in my mind, there's no difference between any of those three things. They're all interlinked. Business to deserve to have a place in our society going forward, I firmly believe needs to be able to show how they are impacting at least two of those things, but ideally all three.
Amazing. So on your new venture, you went from, as you said, being in the battery business, renewable energy, sustainability, natural energy, and all of that, to evolving AI in your new venture. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, of course. So I was looking around for problems that I could sort of sink teeth into, and went through a process of just having open-ended conversations with lots of different people about the challenges they face, and quickly realized that there was a lot of resonance with the challenges I faced, running a hardware-based business. So there were two instances, which stuck into my mind. One was we used to sell sort of a battery system for homes, and there was an installation going on where the installer was installing a battery, the heat pump system, and a solar system. And watching the installer sit there on a piece of garden furniture, download manuals, and try and read those on his phone for 4 hours to understand why device A wasn't talking to device B, which wasn't talking to device C, it just felt horribly sort of inefficient. And there was another instance where, and this is linked to sort of the emerging market context, where there's a lot of these sort of internal combustion engine vehicles, which if you've ever been to sub-Saharan Africa or in India or sort of Latin America, you have these hole-in-the-wall type shops where they almost act like community hubs. For generations, they've been servicing internal combustion engine vehicles. You drive your vehicle up and they'll do whatever is needed to it and get it on its way again. And it struck me kind of seeing this, that as the vehicles become more electrified, as we have more hybrids and we have more electric vehicles,
Yes.
and they enter these markets, how is the existing service infrastructure going to cope with that? How are these people who, for generations of father to son, passed down the knowledge of how to service an internal combustion engine vehicle, going to be able to deal with a battery electric vehicle, which requires different equipment, specialist training, because often the systems are high voltage and therefore much more dangerous? It just felt like we're making this green transition and we're leaving people behind, and it will catch up eventually, but there's going to be a generation of lost livelihood because of this transition. So I saw sort of the amount of hype there was around AI, and I thought this could be an interesting application for the large language models. So through that process of talking to lots of different people, came up with sort of 3 pain statements. So these are sort of statements where the people are experiencing this pain day in, day out, and it's something which they would love to get rid of if they could. Yeah. So these were that you have information which is highly sort of company specific and not necessarily easy to interrogate. So it's not easy to ask questions and sort of get those answers back of the data. You have an over reliance on a small number of individuals. So you have, I remember talking to someone pretty senior within Siemens who told me that 15 years ago in a power station control room, you would have 3 20-year experienced PhD qualified engineers managing everything. And now you have one of those in a back office supporting lots of teams of juniors. You have these single points of failure being created. and you have these individuals are not able to add the strategic value they could add given their experience. So they're stuck handling lots of basic tasks. And both of these are compounded by the third pain statement, which is the generational divide. So you've got younger workers coming into the workforce, and the way they see the world and the way they interact is different. So as an example, they would much prefer watching a TikTok video to get an answer than to sit in a room and be talked at for 5 days on a problem. They don't see themselves in a single field for the whole of their career. They want to be moving around quite a bit. And so I think there's a really great space here to make information accessible for the younger generations that are coming through. And I think that there's a sort of a way to safeguard the experienced workers' time so that they're able to handle more, they're able to contribute in a more strategic way. And so I'm particularly interested in this application for the renewable sector because by 2030, we need another 26 million workers in the space globally in order to achieve net zero by 2050. And so Andy Lane from BP has said, if we don't, we're more likely to run out of people before we run out of money to finance the transition, because of the sort of, you need people in the space, you need people physically doing things, installing systems, maintaining systems, in order to sort of facilitate that transition to the green economy.
So this is for everybody out there who says we're going to be replaced by robots and machines. You still need human hand, human ingenuity to be involved in directing, placing, implementing also.
Especially in the renewable space where you're physically, installing devices, maintaining devices, making these things happen. It's not about replacing workers at all. It's about actually augmenting workers.
Yes, yes. Educating workers also. Yes, to go through that path. And we are going towards that path. We're heading towards that renewable energy, that change of the way. Yes, amazing. Great. Very positive intake and spin on it. Really. Let's talk about your shift from engineering to leadership and mentoring. And how is that such a draw at this stage of your career?
Yeah, so I really enjoy giving back and supporting others. I get so much fulfillment from having conversations with people who are experiencing the same challenges. What I found in my journey is that problems typically boil down to two things. So you have two types of problems in business. You have people-related problems, and you have problems which you don't yet realize are people-related problems. And so one of the things which I really enjoy doing is supporting people as they face these challenges, help them overcome them, and succeed in what they're trying to do. In some way, I think it helps to bring value to the pain and suffering that I've been through on my journey, by sort of being able to share that experience and watching other people not have to go through that same pain and suffering. So
Amazing.
yeah, that's something which I just find really deeply fulfilling.
It's always good. Why do you believe vulnerability and authenticity is important in leadership roles?
Yeah, vulnerability and authenticity is so important in leadership because we need to connect with others. Like, business is ultimately down to relationships, it's down to people, and it's so difficult to trust someone if you don't know them, and if you feel like they've always got a mask on, you can't share your own vulnerabilities, and that means that the strength of the connection that you have is much weaker than if you're able to actually be your authentic self, your true self. So that's really important, because I think the other problem is the more we hide away facets of ourselves, the more they appear subconsciously. And if they are appearing subconsciously, that can have a bigger effect, especially if you're in a leadership position, because you have the most ability to create change, and therefore this sort of shadow that you cast over the organization is much larger. So being able to be yourself, your true self, can help a lot. And also, it's just far less exhausting if you don't have to consciously keep part of yourself segmented away. So being open, being vulnerable, and showing people that you're a human and connecting on a much deeper level means that you're more likely to achieve what you want to achieve and help them achieve what they want to achieve as well.
Amrit, you've designed a usable framework, Ithaca framework, to help leaders with introspection based on your own needs. Where did the idea came from, and what is it? What was it?
I remember in 2023 sitting in the maternity ward with my wife. So we were expecting our second son, and even though so he was 2 weeks late, and we were just waiting. And I remember just sitting there thinking, I was busy answering emails, I was taking phone calls from investors, I was trying to make things happen. There were customers that wanted to talk to me, and I was sat there in the maternity ward with my wife, my sort of heavily pregnant wife, expecting our second child, busy doing work. And in that moment, it just
He didn't want to come out. Dad, he saw what Dad went through. He's like, listen, I got free rent, food, warm. I don't need to deal with this. Dad is dealing with it. Let him deal with this. I don't want to come out.
Do you know what? I think there is some truth in that. I think
Yes.
sort of babies bring their own luck, and
Yes.
he brought some very special luck for me. So
I'm sure.
yeah. So, but in that moment, I remember just thinking, how crazy is this? I really should be present, and it got me thinking about why I wasn't present and what was it that was stopping me internally from being able to switch off at that point. And what I came to the realization that it was because, like many people, I have this voice in the back of my head that's constantly saying, whatever it is you're doing is not good enough. You need to get on and do it, because if you don't, they're going to realize that you're not the right person in this role and you're going to be replaced. So it's commonly, it's a bit of imposter syndrome, a bit of sort of the critical inner voice. And so sort of that was driving me all the time to feel like I couldn't switch off, like I needed to carry on doing the work and making things happen. And so I spent some time then mapping out exactly what it was I wanted to achieve. And so I started out first by writing down what is my mission statement. So we have a mission statement as a company. We write down what it is as a company we want to achieve. Well, if I put that same sort of thinking to my career, what is it that I'm actually looking for, and at what point will I actually be happy with what it is that I've done? And so my mission statement, my life mission statement, is to live a life full of love, safety, and belonging, changing the world for the better. And I then came up with sort of a list of things that I wanted to achieve and started ordering those in terms of which are the needs which are sort of the most important must-have things that I need them sort of to be sorted out relatively soon, and which are the sort of longer-term aspirational things. And so at the very top of, and I call this sort of my pyramid of success. So at the very top of my pyramid, I have the three goals I mentioned before. I want to create something worth more than $1 billion. I want to be positively impacting more than 100 million people. I want to help offset more than a gigaton of CO2. And then sort of down from there are more sort of important things to sort of figure out, and more concrete sort of things to aim for. So, for example, at the base of my pyramid, I want to have a material standard of living. I want to be have time to be with my family. I want to be alive and healthy enough to see my grandchildren. So, just to give you a sort of flavor of some of the things which I was looking at there. And so developing this idea further, I realized actually it's not just enough to put down all the things I want to achieve and sort of figure out where I'm happy. I also need to understand, okay, this is where I am now. That's where I want to get to. So what do I need to change to get me there? And then what is it that I'm going to keep on looking at and measuring and understanding as I go forward to understand, am I actually sort of doing what I want to do? Are there sort of recurring patterns that I'm identifying that I can sort of dig into deeper to understand what are those blockers? So one of the things I've been working on is that critical inner voice, for example. I realized that was potentially a blocker to me being able to do the things I want to do. And then finally, sort of what are the stories we tell ourselves? Because ultimately, if we think about sort of this journey as not just one chapter, but rather sort of a whole book. So, whether sort of Acceleron works or doesn't work, whether Gauge19 works or doesn't work, the experience, that journey along the way, is really valuable, and each part of it is like a chapter in a book leading to the next part of the story. So this is something which I've been working on, and I'm really pleased to have created a framework around this, which is something which I now use in the coaching and mentoring work that I do with other founders and leaders.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. With your passion project, I call it your mentorship for other founders and entrepreneurs who want to get into this space, not necessarily your space, but other spaces. And what is a common mistake you see that a lot of these entrepreneurs kind of make?
I think that generally there's a pursuit of success and the belief that by achieving something they will be happy. And I think sort of digging down deep into it, there's a general kind of the reason we do these things sometimes can be driven by the fear, and the fear is related to is there going to be sort of love, safety, and belonging? Those sort of three elements that we as humans always crave. We want the love of those around us. We want to feel like we belong, and we want that sort of safety there. And so, if you think about it, like I've seen this certainly. Sometimes leaders engage with activity that they don't feel like they can stop because they're so worried about the consequence of realizing one of those fears. But there is a life on the other side of that, and I think sometimes just having someone to talk to and sort of go through that with can be immensely sort of helpful. So, I think it's sort of addressing those fears, being really truthful with yourself. So having that sort of radical honesty. Like one of my favorite sort of questions to ask is, how am I complicit in creating the conditions which I say I do not want? So this is something which a great coach, Jerry Colonna, who has a podcast as well, which I listen to regularly, talks about quite a bit. It's a great prompt and often something which I encourage folks to ask themselves. If you're sort of in a situation, it's good to sort of be at peace with and understand what role you've had to play in creating that condition as well.
How do you adapt your message for audiences like HSBC and Toyota?
Yeah, so I think for me, it's again connecting with humans on a deep level. So as entrepreneurs, we're mission driven. We want to achieve something, and generally, you'd say that sort of entrepreneurs are optimistic. So it's fairly simple, fairly easy to connect with. When it comes to sort of large corporates, I haven't lived that life of a person in a large corporate, so I don't necessarily understand the pains and the stresses that they go through. But I think ultimately you have leaders within these large corporates who want to achieve something, they want to do something, often trying to make change. And I think that's something that's really similar to the entrepreneur story. Like we're always driving for change. We're trying to make things happen. Otherwise, we wouldn't be entrepreneurs.
Yes.
So I find that sort of leaders within these large corporates sometimes need to do that as well. So being able to connect with them and talk to them about sort of the challenges they face, and again the same sorts of questions about sort of the change they're trying to make, the fear they're trying to avoid, the truths that they may sort of be aware of but maybe don't want to address, is really can be really powerful for them.
How do you see business playing a larger role in rehabilitating the planet in the future?
Well, business is one of those tools that has the potential to be very powerful for the transition we're going through. If we can design business systems that are truly generative for the world, and what I mean by that is, where there's no conflict between the profit they generate, the positive impact they have on people, the society around them, as well as the environment, then we have something which is truly special. Because then, as that company does well, it radiates that sustainability out to the world around it as well. And so if we can design our businesses to be more with this kind of thinking, then that would be transformative for the environment. I think, and I don't think this would ever happen, or at least maybe it's a sort of big challenge to make it happen. But if we could, for example, re-engineer the financial markets so that the value of a company is not based on its financial profit alone, but actually on the environmental impact and the societal impact it has as well, then actually we would value the companies which are the most generative for us, as opposed to the companies which drive profit at all cost. Why is it that the big energy companies are the most valuable companies when actually they're often the ones causing the most damage to the planet? I'm sure we can change that if we sort of engineer the markets to respond in that way.
Interesting. Yes, correct, absolutely. I like your take on it. What is your goals for you and for your ventures in the coming years?
Yeah, so everything I do needs to have that positive impact. So both in terms of the people, the environment, and as well as financial return. So I want to see one of the things I'm really passionate about. So another sort of passion project of mine. I chair an ESG, environmental, societal, and governance special interest group here in the UK. And so we're focused on social mobility. So I'm as a sort of child of a family that immigrated here, I'm really keen to see that sort of people who don't have access to networks, people who sort of perhaps are from marginalized parts of society, have access to opportunities as well. So one of the things this special interest group is doing is looking at the social mobility angle and seeing how do we actually sort of make this happen? What frameworks work? Yeah. How can we sort of give people the same access to opportunities that people who go to Ivy League schools or famous schools and famous universities they have access to as well. So a bit of leveling the playing field here as well. So that's something I'm also really passionate about. So really creating that tangible impact. Ultimately, the reason I do all of this is because I want to. I think about my children. They're very young, so I've got a 4-year-old and now 1-year-old, and they're going to face challenges in their lifetime, which I can only sort of imagine based on the environment, based on how things are going. And so it's really not just for them, but all the other children as well. Like we as this generation, it's our job to step up and try and help them make that more bearable, make it more livable than perhaps it would be otherwise.
Absolutely. Amrit Chandan, really this has been an amazing, insightful, and I have to say, I'll repeat it twice, educational. Yeah, absolutely. Amazing knowledge, and thank you for coming on to Entrepreneurs in Tech. It's been a pleasure, and I just want to thank also everybody else, our viewers and listeners, for joining us today on Entrepreneurs in Tech. Be sure to connect with us on social media. Until next time, keep innovating, stay curious, and think outside the box. And keep feeding your mind with knowledge. Absolutely. And Amrit is a great example of that. Thank you and take care.
Thank you so much, Bob. And as we say in Gauge19, may your questions always be answered.
Yes, Gauge19. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to share. Innovate presents Entrepreneurs in Tech podcast. And if you're joining us on YouTube, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Until next time.